Organizational Tutors, which is based in New York City. We're like a network of independent consultants who work with kids who are struggling in a learning environment for a variety of different reasons, and we look through the lens of executive functioning skill development with special attention to attention deficits also, since we run into that so frequently. And I work with elementary, middle school, and high school kids, and I also have 2 elementary school children myself. So I am learning, now I'm having to practice what I have preached for so long, and so I have a sense of how challenging all of this can be. So I'm going to take you through what we really want to do is help you create a toolbox. Executive functioning, and we'll start by talking about what that is. That was a word that not many people knew about 10 years ago, and it's really started to gain traction as we've started to realize that it's essential to a child's ability to learn well. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about what they are, and then we will talk about what you can do as parents in the home to help your kids develop these skills. And I'm going to talk about both elementary and middle school tonight, because we have kids from that range of ages, and also because, as I was saying, time really flies sometimes, and you have an elementary school kid, and then you wake up and all of a sudden you have a middle school kid. So as part of modeling good executive functioning, we'll do a little bit of looking forward, and I'll even sprinkle in a little bit of what this means for a high school student so that you can get a sense of what's coming. So executive functioning, for those of you who don't know, it's a umbrella term. It covers a number of different cognitive processes. They're all interrelated, and the ones that probably are the most essential for us to focus on are listed right here. This is the ability to sustain attention, the ability to inhibit yourself from being distracted, working memory, which is holding on to bits of information while you're executing tasks, cognitive flexibility, which is just what it sounds like, the ability when you get stuck to think outside the box, to come up with different ways to solve problems rather than getting stuck in one place, and then self-regulation, which refers to both emotional regulation as well as attention and distraction. So those are sort of the 5 big important ones. Different experts will refer to these skill sets using slightly different terms, but they're all related to these specific tasks that we have to do. And this is a pitch for relevance. This is why we care about strong executive functioning skills, because they can help kids move efficiently through their days. And we're going to talk not just about the school day, but also the beginning of the day and the end of the day, and the way that you can sort of bookend their days with some positive executive functioning support with those morning routines, which can be incredibly challenging. The ability to initiate tasks. Sometimes you have kids who, once they're actually in the flow, can do it, but to get them to actually initiate and start the task, whether it's cleaning their room, getting dressed, or doing homework, can be incredibly difficult. Starting homework right there, and we can talk a little bit more about homework in the home as well, and how to use executive functioning skills there. Transitioning from one activity to the next can be incredibly challenging, and we're going to talk a little bit about screen time, of course, because that is something that we as parents all have to deal with, and a little bit about transitioning using screen time as well. The regulation of emotions and the decreasing of tantrums, which for a middle school kid maybe isn't quite a tantrum anymore, but it's their equivalent version of that, right? The biggest thing, and people have told me this since I became a parent, and it is true, that they do what we do, not what we say. So one of the things that we want you to have in your toolbox is a way for you to strengthen your own executive functioning so that they can see you modeling this. So an example of what we're talking about is if we use calendars to make a plan, we are modeling for them anticipation and organization. can do that as a family. You can also sort of do it performatively or tell them about how you create a calendar for yourself. The other thing is reflecting on behaviors. This is related to metacognition, which becomes relevant as an executive functioning term when kids are a little bit older, but it can really start to play in even in early elementary school, where we ask them to think about how they behave and what they get from behaving that way. So I try to model this all the time. I had an experience yesterday morning where I lost my temper at breakfast, and then all day I was like, oh my God, I really shouldn't have done that. And so then at dinner, I said, I was reflecting on why I was so cranky at breakfast this morning, and I realized I stayed up last night too late, and I didn't get enough sleep. And because of that, I yelled at you guys, and I wish I hadn't. And those tiny little moments, which can sometimes be painful to admit as a parent, can be incredibly instructive for them. And the more we pepper that in and show them that we're doing that, the more that we can get them to start doing that same kind of reflection as well. Have routines. It is a true thing, and I fought against this, that kids having routines makes a huge difference. It can give them the ability to regulate emotions, initiate tasks, get through all of the day's activities in a way that they will struggle to do without routine. We just had February break 2 weeks ago, and I was shocked at how my kids fell apart without the structure of routine and school, and how ready even they were after a week off to have a little bit of that structure. So we'll talk about how to build that in the home as well. And then the last thing related also to emotional regulation is our ability to model stopping and taking a breath. That could be a literal breath. I have some friends who will just literally stop and ask their kids to breathe with them. But metaphorically, it's also just when we get into an emotional state, if we can show them that we are going to pause and de-escalate the situation, they will start being able to do that as well. So we'll start at the very beginning of the day with the morning routine. The biggest thing about all of this is make a plan. And even, this is where I say I'm like the cobbler's kids have no shoes. Even though I have done this work with the kids that I work with, it took me too long to create a morning chart routine with my own kids. And the second I did it, it made an enormous, enormous difference. So I encourage it both as a professional and as a fellow parent to have a plan in the morning that is written out, that has pictures to go along with it depending on the age of your child. I actually got one of those charts that has like a little slide button where you can check off the things you did. I bought it on Amazon for like $7. They, for some reason, love just checking the box. So anything that has a tactile component, it's actually better than even having something that they're just looking at. If there's an action that they can do after they finish each thing, sometimes people do a star chart or some kind of chart like that. Crossing off the to-do list for ourselves, we feel accomplishment when we get to do that, and they will as well. And it also allows them to see time spatially and to see tasks spatially, right? Time is such a bizarre construct, and it's very hard for kids to understand how time is passing. And if we can show them the morning is passing, this is what happens, and by this last task, you have to be out the door, they can start having a grip on what we're asking them to do. The other thing that's amazing is it cuts down on nagging. I just don't talk anymore. I mean, I do, but I try not to. I just say, there's your list, you got it, I'm so proud of you, you can do it on your own, that's great. Time markers and timers. My house now sounds like a hospital because of how many timers I have going off. I might need to pull it back a little bit. But again, returning to this idea that we're asking them to experience time, and they can't. They can't feel it. They can't feel when you say 10 minutes. They don't know what that means. And so to have a timer that they can watch counting down, have a timer that makes a sound when it's time to move on to the next activity is enormously helpful. These tiny little hacks that can make a really big difference. The routine should be the same every morning, you know? It just, the continuity, it becomes automated. It's like brushing your teeth after a while. You don't think about it anymore. And the more that they don't have to think about what they're doing, the fewer fights you have, the better that just gets worked into their brains. Again, rewarding efficiency and independence. Reward doesn't mean you have to like buy them a new toy every time they do something. But positive reinforcement, like the science is in, it works. Praising kids for the effort that they are putting in to become more efficient and independent makes a really big difference. Noticing it, commenting on it. I will sometimes give them like, hey, if you can do this chart this whole week and not ask for help, if I don't have to remind you of anything at the end of the week, there could be a small reward. I do that when we sort of fall into dysregulation and need to buck back up again. But again, if you have the chart and they're doing it on their own, they feel so good. And they don't have that feeling, which is like grown-ups are telling me what to do all the time and it's getting really old. They can start really feeling proud of themselves for doing it on their own. Plan the night before. It's classic, you know. Pack your lunch, pick out your clothes, make sure your bag is packed, mentally go through the next day, maybe at bedtime even, and we'll talk about evening routines in a little bit, but maybe at bedtime even you can talk, visualize what's going to happen the next day. What do you have after school? What do we have to remember? The more we can get them to start thinking about what's coming, it will pay off in the future. It seems small now, but if they can build these skills at this age, when they get to high school, they're going to be much better off. And then give extra time. I mean, I don't like getting up 15 minutes earlier than I need to, but it makes such an enormous difference. And we will talk about this also in a little bit. We can sometimes have fantasies about how much time things take because we want them to take less time than they do, even as adults. And so take time tomorrow morning to actually time the typical routine. Use real hard data, real facts to determine how much time you need for each thing. And you can even get nitty gritty, like how long does my kid actually eat breakfast for? How long does it take them to get dressed? You can really pay attention to the discrete tasks, get a sense of how long they take, and that will help you, A, figure out where you might be able to shave off some time if you need to, but B, be really honest with yourself and realistic about how long the morning really takes, because it's probably longer than you want it to. This is sort of an example of one type of chart that you can use where you have the time, activity, and the place to mark off if you did it or not. You can make these, you can print them, you can buy them, you can ask your kid to draw them. But again, you give them a time, you give them some visual, probably even for middle school kids, the visual is really useful, even if they don't necessarily need it, they can help ground them. And notice on this chart too, when we say get dressed, we break it down into discrete tasks too. Brush your hair, put on your deodorant, don't forget your socks. Kids never, ever remember their socks. It's shocking. For breakfast, as part of this morning routine, and in general, a really good trick is only a couple of choices. The more choices, the harder it is for them to ground themselves in that moment. And if you give the same choices every morning, they feel like they have some options, but they're not overwhelmed. And then you can check it off as you go. Oops, okay, whoops, no, there we go. This is relevant to the morning routine, but this is relevant to many things throughout the day, and in the evening, and on the weekends, and in school, I'm sure. We call it set shifting. It's extremely challenging for many kids, especially if they struggle with executive function skills, or if they have even a hint of attention deficit issues, whether it would be a full-blown diagnosis of ADHD or not. It's really hard to go from one activity to the next. And it's really hard as a parent to remember how hard it is, especially when you're asking them to stop something that they're enjoying doing. So we'll talk a little bit about all the things that are going on in their brains and what we can do to help them go from one activity to the next slightly more easily. So what you want to have, and this is just sort of like a little script you can memorize. You want to have a transition plan. Before you get to this, even though, you want the warnings and you want the timer, if you can have it. You want, the kid is watching a show. You say to them, you can be on your screen for 5 more minutes. See this timer? This timer says 5 minutes. I'm hitting start. Do you see the numbers counting down? Yes. How much time did I say you have? 5 minutes. What's happening in 5 minutes? I have to turn my screen off. And I actually really encourage you to require them to reply. It's hard to believe that they don't hear us, but I actually think sometimes they really can. Kids have a capacity to become absorbed in activities that we lack as adults. And it's part of what makes being a kid so wonderful, is the way that they can get lost in what they're doing. So to be fair to them, we make sure we have their verbal agreement and understanding of what we're asking. And then we do what they call the two-pronged approach. You want to give a positive and a negative. And the idea of this is teaching this very important skill of delayed gratification. So the example down here, I know that playing with your Legos is really fun. There's a typo, but I know that playing with your Legos is really fun. Right now we have to leave for school, but when you come back, you'll get to play with your Legos again. So it's actually a positive sandwich. Something positive about how fun what they're doing is, something that may feel negative to them about what they have to do next, and then something positive that happens on the other side of that. It sounds so simple, but if you can memorize that script and get into the habit of using it at transitions, you'll start to notice that it makes a big difference. The other, okay, so then we have the true screen time stuff, and for middle school kids, I'm actually going to go into this a little bit later in the presentation in more depth, because you guys are probably starting to deal with or think about having to deal with phones and computers in a new way. So this is just a brief reference, and then we'll talk more about it in a little bit. But when you are using screens with your children, go into it with a plan. To ask them to stop watching without going into another activity is really hard for them. It's like, putting something cold turkey. So going back to that positive, negative, positive sandwich, I would think about when they sit down to screen time, what is the thing they're doing? Even if it's not another fun activity, if it's just something else that's giving them that structure, that's giving them that routine, that's like, when you turn your screen off, we are going to eat dinner. We are going to play a game, whatever it is. But something concrete so that they're going from one thing to the next instead of one thing into just, abstract time passing. And then again, we already talked about this, but with screen time, the timer is essential. They cannot feel, none of us can feel. How many of us have had the Netflix thing pop up being like, are you still watching? So it's really great to give them that experience of learning how time feels. Self-regulation. The 3 building blocks of self-regulation are eating, sleeping, and exercise. Now, luckily for us, most of us live in school districts that really prize recess and outdoor time and gym. So hopefully your kids are getting that exercise piece as part of school. If you suspect they're not, kids need to run a lot. So you should figure out a way to work that in somehow after school. And then the eating and sleeping, we can talk more about sleep routines later, and I can answer questions about that. But those are just the building blocks for all humans and especially for kids. So if your kid is dysregulated, this is where I look first. Are they getting enough sleep? Are they eating protein and not pasta every single night? It's my children. And have they gotten to run around? Okay, looking into the evening routine, very similar to what we talk about in the morning. Different activities, obviously, but I love the idea of a chart for this as well. We have a morning chart and we have a night chart. Same idea of crossing things off, same idea of breaking down tasks. putting things on the list that are so obvious you don't think you need to write them down, like go to the potty, or, you know, wash your hands after you go to the potty, whatever it may be. And it's actually a fun activity to do it with them and ask them to go through, like, okay, we're gonna make a list, but we've gotta observe. We're kind of scientists. What do we do every night? What order do we do it in? Let's write it down. Did we remember everything? And you can be silly about it, like, okay, you picked up your toothbrush, you put the toothpaste on, you put the toothbrush in your mouth. Maybe we don't have to write down all of that, you know, but make it fun. Really draw their attention to the details of what they're doing, because they probably don't really know. This emotional regulation piece, we'll keep talking about it, because as you were pointing out earlier with COVID, all of our post-COVID kids are, you know, they're struggling a lot, many of them, with this piece of it, because they missed 2 years of having to be in a classroom every single day with other kids, so we're playing a little bit of catch up. I already talked a little bit about reflecting on intense emotional experiences. It's important, even when it feels like your kid isn't thinking about it, that if something intense has occurred, that you bring it up. And if they're not willing to reflect on it, or if they don't have the capacity at this age to reflect on it, you can talk about a similar experience you had. You can talk about if you witnessed whatever happened. You can talk about how it made you feel. Again, it's less important that you actually get them talking, and more important that you are modeling for them that when we go through intense emotional stuff, we reflect on it. Let's say it's a tantrum. Identifying the precursors, not in the moment, but after. Everybody's calmed down. It's a couple of hours later. Hey, you know, you had a really big tantrum tonight. You got really upset. And that's okay, everybody gets upset sometimes. But can you help me think about what led up to it? Because maybe if we can think about what's causing the tantrum, we'll be able to get ahead of it this time. Tolerate and down-regulate. That's for during the tantrum. So this idea of not escalating by raising your own emotional reaction to this tantrum. This is one of the things where I'm like, this is what I practice, what I preach. I try very hard. I make mistakes all the time. But to show them, I can tolerate your discomfort, and you're really angry now, and you're allowed to be angry. And here's the things you can do when you are angry. Throw a sock at the wall. Tell me in words, in a normal voice, what I did that upset you. But here's what you can't do. Hit your sister, hit me, whatever it may be. To show them that we are not saying that the emotions aren't okay. The emotions are always okay. We're just trying to help them think about how they express those emotions. And we name them. And I have a cute picture that a kid drew that I'll show you on one of the next slides. Depending on the age, it can be really useful to get them to do a little bit of art about this stuff. But name the experience. Say the feeling word. In the schools now, they have those wonderful feeling charts. You can print them out at home. And the reason this is important is because the more language they have to understand the nuance of the way that they're feeling, the more they'll be able to identify what caused the feeling, the more they'll be able to move through the feeling more quickly, right? So they know, let's say in kindergarten, they know angry, happy, sad, right? But we all know as adults that there's a huge spectrum in between all of those feelings. And the more we can give them the language to understand that, the better they can start regulating those. And then again, as we talked about, moments of vulnerability. We can allow ourselves to be blindsided sometimes, but if we're really honest, most of the time, these meltdowns are happening because of something like sleep deprivation, hunger, or frustration about something that doesn't have to do with the task at hand. So when those vulnerable moments pop up, see if you can get ahead of them instead of waiting for them to unravel, because it's much harder to downregulate once you're in a heightened emotional state. This is the cute drawing, feelings volcano. So got a kid to create the way it feels. And you can use different images. This child chose a volcano. And on the left, the feelings that he is describing. So we've got so mad, the angriest thing ever, with the angry face, sad or frustrated, a tiny bit mad, bothered, a little bit annoyed. And then on the other side, the behaviors and the things that it feels like in this kid's body and what might help him. So when he's so mad, the angriest thing ever, he can't stop his body from hitting. What he can do is hit or punch a pillow or a beanbag. When he's sad or frustrated, he does have a hard time stopping body from hurting. And then if he's only a tiny bit mad, a lovey might help. So you can get them to come up with, in calm moments, things that can help them down-regulate in that way. Impulse control. Another very important and very challenging executive function. They really don't have this super well developed yet at this age in elementary school. They're starting to more in later years and in middle school. But the problem with poor impulse control is that you are thinking before you're acting, struggling to wait for the appropriate time to speak or take your turn, and then for kids who are slightly older, writing or doing any work without editing or checking it. And the way that we encourage you to support impulse control in conversations, they're allowed to pause before they respond, right? Pause for 3 seconds. And you can be didactic with the kid. You can really say, notice in class, if you feel like you have something to say and your teacher says you've been talking out a lot, before you have something to say, count to 3 and see if it's really a time for someone to say something, right? And you can do that with your friends as well. Sometimes kids struggle in social relationships even to take turns or to give their friends space to talk. And sometimes we can be explicit as we teach about how to do this, right? We don't have to expect them to just magically absorb these social skills, especially because many of them were in quarantine for a long time and didn't get to practice. So don't be afraid to be explicit about how to help that. Planning. So if you have a kid who struggles with planning, you're going to see that they have a hard time scheduling, making up strategies. If they're a little bit older and they're being asked to outline, that would be really hard for them to do. The way to address this is first to set realistic goals. If we set goals that are too idealistic and we're setting the kids up to fail, we're going to create a negative reinforcement pattern that is going to be hard to break. If you allow them the experience of having small wins because the goals are successful, that's amazing. Then they feel positive, they get that little boost of dopamine because they did the thing they were asked to do, and it's going to encourage them. They have a positive association. They'll do it again more. Prioritize work in order of deadlines and importance. This is relevant even with younger kids. Obviously, they're not struggling with deadlines in the same way, but they still have things they have to do. And getting them to think about what it is that's the most important thing, and if it's the most important thing, I should do it first. Using calendars and planners, we talked about you modeling that earlier, but do it with your kids. Get them to create their own calendar and planner. When they get home, even if they have 5 minutes of homework, they can make a list writing down what it is they have to do for work. Just starting to build that muscle and exercise it. Scheduling breaks and downtime, this is really important, and this becomes more and more relevant in middle school, but similar to the way we talked about for the morning routine, getting realistic about how much time it actually takes, see if you can get your kids to start doing that about how long they can sustain attention. So for example, if they come home and they have an hour of homework, do they have the capacity to sit down for a full hour and do that homework? Some will, some will not. And that's okay. We want to meet them where they are. But ask them how long they can sustain attention. Ask them to put a timer, start their homework, and notice when their mind starts wandering, right? If it's 5 minutes, okay, maybe we want to encourage them to do it 10. If it's 20 minutes, great. But once we get that time, once we know how long they can generally focus for, we start scheduling breaks for them. So you're going to sit down, you're going to do your homework. it's 7 o'clock, work until 7:20, and then we're going to take a 5-minute stretch break. The idea of doing this is to get ahead of mental fatigue. If we can give them a break, they can, before they've hit the wall, they'll refresh more easily and go back into the task more easily. Obviously, we can talk about this more, but the breaks and the downtime need to be carefully selected. It should not be looking at a screen. It should be getting water, taking a snack, stepping outside, throwing a basketball. And you can use a timer for the breaks too. Do they need a 5-minute break? Do they need a 10-minute break? You can give them, empower them to make some of these decisions and then stick with it. Again, like we talked about, this is acknowledging that they have fantasies about how long it's going to take to do homework, just like we have fantasies about how long it's going to take us, like, to commute or, get a report done for work. They have the same fantasies, so encouraging them to really measure how much time it takes becomes really useful. Organization, another executive function that many kids struggle with. This would be trouble prioritizing tasks, knowing which one's the most important, and challenge with physical materials as well as due dates and information. So this goes a little bit into working memory when we're talking about information. But the answers to this are the calendar we've already talked about. But for younger kids and older kids, color coding becomes incredibly useful. Kids can get really into this. They get them special markers, and they write their math homework in one color, and they write their after-school activity in another, and they get to sort of design what their system looks like. You can start on a filing system really young. Like in kindergarten, they come home with artwork. Oh, let's make a folder for your artwork. This is your artwork folder. You put your artwork in here, and we keep the folders over here. That's an example of starting this skill before they actually may need it because of how much it will pay off if this becomes habitual for them. Accordion folders are amazing to save space, so we encourage that. And then when it comes into the working backwards piece, we'll talk about that a little bit more, but the basic idea here is looking at the night or the week and saying, what do I want to have happen by Sunday night? I want to be able to watch TV for 2 hours. What do I have to do in order to be able to watch TV for 2 hours? I got to get my homework done. What else do I have to do on the weekend? Thinking backwards that way will encourage them to understand the purpose of planning. So that can be a good thing to start practicing now. Time management. The problems, poor awareness of how time elapses, which we've been talking about, difficulty managing their schedules, and procrastination. One special trick that I like for awareness of how time elapses, which is more relevant for kids in later elementary school, but give them an analog clock, not a digital clock. If you can give them a clock that shows the clock face, it will help them be able to see time move in a spatial way, whereas the digital clock just flares a different number. It still remains abstract. That can be an incredibly useful thing to have in the home. And then time chunking. That's a little bit related to the scheduling breaks. Chunking your time. First, you're going to do math. Then you're going to take a break. Then you're going to eat dinner. Then you're going to take a break. Then you get one show. Then you take a break. And getting them to see time in little chunks like that, where the activities are being tied to specific time. Use timers again, make decisions together about when to take breaks, and encourage them even at a young age to think about what's most important and when should I do it if it's most important. This is good for your calendar. This is maybe a little bit more of a parent tip as a way to be good models for them and ones that they can move into as they get older. But for you, when you look at your calendar, you want your calendar to actually look like your life. So if your life feels a little hectic and your calendar looks super well arranged, you're probably not writing everything down. And again, all of this is related to the same theme of dispelling fantasies about how long it takes to do things, okay? So in your calendar, merge it all. Put in the routines you need to do do the same thing of working backwards that we talked about asking the kids to do. What do I need to do by Sunday night? I need to do this. In order to get that done, I have to do this by Sunday morning, all the way back to where we are now, Tuesday night. Make time to do the to-dos. Everybody has a separate to-do list. It's separate. It's like, here's my calendar, here's my to-do list. But this to-do list out here never gets done if it doesn't actually get put into the calendar. So a good tip for yourself, for older kids, is get that to-do list, give all of those tasks an actual spot. As your kids get older, and maybe some of the middle school people are already doing this, if your kids have phones or some kind of digital calendar, inviting family to events so that you can together see what's happening. It's very easy to do on Google. Most people know how to do it, but if you don't, you can easily learn. And then you can sort of share events and activities. And then you can also use your calendar as a way to reflect, to see if it is reflecting your life. On Sunday night, if you feel exhausted, like what happened this week, actually go back and look. What did happen this week? Why am I so tired? And encourage your kids to do that too. You had a rough week. You had a fight with your friend. You didn't get your homework done 2 nights. Your teacher said you weren't listening. What happened this week that made this week harder than other weeks? Figure it out, and that is also reminding them that they have the power to make changes positively that will impact their mood and their weeks moving forward. Family modeling, use of calendar, use of timers, helping them with the setup and plan. For a while, they will need support to think about how to plan stuff. Do it with them, make it fun. Show them your own self-care with routine, sleep, and exercise. This is one that I really need to be working on right now. When I do go to yoga, I'm like, I am going to yoga. And really try to show how important that is to me. My own emotional regulation, I talked about hitting pause and mindful attention to reducing impulsivity in ourselves. If we yell and lose our tempers, they will yell and lose their tempers. And also put tech away. And we'll get into this more as we're getting into the middle school tech stuff, but if we're on our phones all the time, our kids will be on their phones all the time. And I am as guilty of it as anybody, so I know how hard it is. But it's one of the most tangible, concrete things you can do to make a difference in the way your kids use tech is to change the way you use it. Okay, so starting to think ahead for middle school, for those of you who are in elementary, these are sort of the tasks that we want kids to be focusing on, and as parents, we want to be focusing on so that they are not blindsided by the transition. Again, a lot of kids, because of COVID, weren't ready for the next phase of life. You're in middle school? Elementary, okay. A lot of middle school teachers I've talked about have been like, these kids don't know how to change classes, don't know how to use lockers, right? They missed that. So the more we can talk to them about what's coming as they get moved out of elementary into middle, the better it will be. Building independence from a young age, that means they get themselves dressed. They get their own breakfast, those little things. Helping them be alone. I'm bored. Go play by yourself. My sister won't play with me. Go play by yourself. Go to your room. Learn to be alone. It's such an incredibly essential skill to have. Technology we talk about, I mean, this is like on these slides a million times because of how important it is, but also discussing separation. So as an example, school breaks coming to an end, remind them like, hey, we've been together a lot this week because I took off work or you had to stay home. Next week you're going to be back at school. What's it going to feel like to be apart? All of that planning for emotional stuff. And managing expectations and perfectionism. You can see the seeds of perfectionism in kindergarten, younger than that, right? And perfectionism is a dangerous road to walk down because a lot of times kids who are perfectionists can manage it in early elementary school, and we might even praise it a little bit. Like, oh my God, that's so cool, you worked so hard on that. But when you see that it's crossing into an expectation of perfection that is unreasonable, address it young because it will come back to really get in their way in middle school and high school. Okay, so now going a little bit into briefly some of the older middle school stuff just to make sure that everybody gets a sense of their kids' specific stage. Moving efficiently through their days, your middle school kids may at some point be rejecting of charts or any cute drawing pictures, but that doesn't mean that they don't have a routine. The routine still needs to be there, even if it's not written down. It's something that they need to do regularly every day. We call them anchors. You have a morning routine, it anchors your morning. You have a night routine, it anchors your night. It gives you a sense of routine, continuity, all of that. Initiating tasks. Starting your homework. What works? What helps? It's really hard to get started. What are the 3 things you can do to make yourself sit down and get started? Will you sit and meditate for a minute? You might have a kid who would do that. If you do, I'm very jealous. But it's, the science is also there on meditation and how incredibly useful that is. Does it help to have me sit next to you for the first 10 minutes that you're starting your work so that you have a little bit of accountability and then step away? And over time, you can step away earlier, right? I'll sit down with you for 1 minute. Did you block all of the websites that distract you? Did you put your phone in the lockbox? Are you sitting in a room where somebody else can see your screen if you're someone who gets distracted? Is that good to have that as a monitor? Are you somebody who really needs to work in your room? Figure out what works for them and make it a routine. The same thing every day. They start their homework in the same place every day, and as much as possible at the same time every day. And then, right, with teenagers, we call the tantrums outbursts, but we're working to decrease those, and it's actually the same skills that we've been talking about, just the language becomes slightly more sophisticated. Healthy eating, healthy sleep, movement and exercise. Harder to guarantee that middle school kids are getting this because it's just not as focused on at those ages, even though it is absolutely as important. Standing by the routines is important. It's very easy to one day just be like, I'm tired, I'm not going to make them do X, Y, Z. And all of us have days like that and should. But keep those days to a minimum, because the thing that makes the routine work is the consistency. These are the years that we give them the opportunity to learn about having a healthy balance in their lives, which is something that adults struggle with also, so it's just a time to plant the seeds for that. And for those of you with middle school kids, it is worth saying that substance abuse can be a regulatory issue, so don't ignore it just because you hope it's not a problem. Really find out, dig in, ask questions. If you suspect that they are using substances, that's going to impact their executive functioning, their sleep, their eating, all of that. So help them see and connect the dots between that behavior and their goals. This is a little bit more in-depth screen time stuff for teenagers, for the middle school kids. First of all, let's validate how hard it is. Because when we pretend it's easy, they think we don't get them. We're like, just put your phone away. But then we know how hard it is. We're all addicted to our phones, our email, our computers, screens. So be honest about that. Validate the experience, then you'll get their buy-in more quickly. We focus a lot on how much, and it's important. How much matters. But what are they using the screen time for is also important for them to investigate from a values place, right? Like, I notice I'm texting my friends all the time. Okay, well maybe that's an okay way to use your screen time because you value your friendships. I notice I'm scrolling through Instagram feeling horrible about myself and feeling jealous of everybody else. Maybe there's a different way to use your phone in that way, right? We accept they're going to use it, so let's think about how to shape what they're using it for a little bit more. Screened Out is a documentary that you could watch with your kids. It's really great, and it is compelling and convincing to teenagers. There have been articles recently about high school kids getting together and being like, we do phoneless nights where they all agree to put their phone in a lockbox and hang out and play board games. Like, they feel it too. They want ways to get out of it. And Screen Strong Challenge is like a way to sort of gamify the process of reducing screen time. Collaborate, work together, come up with something that works as a team. Don't just hand them the rules. Come up with the rules together, do a little compromising, a little negotiation, arrive where everybody's happy, model it, scaffold the goals. If your kid is on their phone 10 hours a day, and then you're like, you can have 30 minutes a day, that's not realistic. You need to give them a chance to slowly break down that screen time, and you can incentivize this stuff. Doesn't always have to be, again, toys, but it could be a trip, time with a special thing, a special activity that you do as a family. Come up with a sort of bucket list of good incentives that they would be into and dole them out. If you can get your screen time down to 2 hours a day, we will do X, Y, Z this weekend. The other thing is that if we give them other things to do, they will be on their screens less. It's the same thing that we said about the kid who's watching TV and we're like, okay, time to turn off the TV, and we don't give them any activity to transition into. That's hard. Same thing with teens. Get out with them, do stuff with them, schedule activities that don't involve the phone so that they're not left with the choice of, well, what am I supposed to do? It will make it much easier for them to break the habit. Bottom-up attention when we are on tech, it's involuntary, it's stimulus-driven. It's why we have to validate how hard it is, because it is just impulse, impulse, impulse. We can talk to them about ways to do it top-down. I like to think of it as like your better angel. How many hours does your better angel want you to do on your screen? 2. Okay, how can we make that happen for you? You don't have the ability right now to regulate yourself. I don't have the ability to regulate myself. So we have a lot of really wonderful things out there that we can use. We have apps like Freedom and Self-Control. If you don't know what those are, you can Google them, but these are all just easy website blockers that keeps it so that the kids cannot get on the websites. I know they know how to get around all of this stuff. I don't mean to be naive, but every little barrier we put up for them gives them a moment to pause and reflect. So even if they ultimately hop the barrier, they had a moment of being like, oh shoot, the app's on because I'm not supposed to be doing this. Whereas if the app's not on, they don't even have that moment. Agree together that you are about how you will monitor their screen time. I think it's better to be honest about what you are doing to monitor it and let them know that you're doing that than it is to do it sneakily. Also, you can just turn the internet off at 8 o'clock, just unplug the router. I know everybody can get around that too, but again, every step that we have to sort of pause and reflect is good. We now have a lockbox that my husband and I put our own phones into at dinner time and put away. Nothing important can get to us. We call it the sacred times dinner, and then when your kids are older, an hour before bed, because sleep hygiene, I mean, it's a no-brainer. We all know this. It's hard to do it, but the screens, the blue light, it literally keeps them up. Biologically, they have a harder time turning off and going to sleep because their brains think that it is still daylight. The last piece is just adding in a little bit of what to do beyond executive functioning. These are sort of, to me, the 3 pillars of the gold standard of what we should be focusing on. The executive functioning we just talked about for an hour. The growth mindset is this idea, this belief that we can change, that our brains are muscles, that if we want to change our behavior, if we practice doing the behavior we want, we will change it over time. It's not, kids don't know that. They don't understand that. We use language all the time like, you are fast, you talk too much, you get bored easily, right? And they believe those as identities. We want to change our language to say like, hey, like people who are talented at soccer play for hours every day. They're getting better at it because they're practicing. If you want to do better at math, that's all you have to do. And get them to really understand that growth mindset. When failures pop up, see if you can use it as a chance for them to see it as a learning opportunity. Oh man, you didn't make it on the gymnastics team and you wanted it so much. you're so disappointed, what did we learn from this? What would you go back and do differently if you could do it again? And then the third pillar here is grit, which is the Duckworth. Angela Duckworth is a really great, she's like amazing TED Talks where she talks about this, but grit is the willingness to commit to an action. It's the work ethic. It's the hard work that kids put in. And she calls the hard thing rule. Stick with things over the long term until you master them. Everyone has a hard thing. Finish what you start. Don't quit mid-season. You don't have to sign up again next year, but you gain something from finishing out the year of baseball, soccer, whatever it is. And you pick your hard thing yourself. So everybody has to do something that's hard for them. Maybe it's every day, maybe it's every week, maybe it's every year, I don't know. But this way of encouraging kids to think about doing, not just doing the things that are easy, but really learning to put in the work to do the things that are hard. These are the four, all of these we've talked about: creating a family calendar, defining and simplifying the routine. That's where we were talking about the extra air that you may be getting into routines and really paying attention to where you can take it out. Sleep hygiene and routine, we can talk about. If you guys have questions about that, I can answer more about that after, about good sleep hygiene. And identifying what you do know. This is a way to combat frustration tolerance. When a kid is like, I don't know how to do this math homework. Okay, you don't know how to do this, but what do you know how to do? Do you know how to do the first step of it? Really looking from a strengths-based place. And then for any of you with middle schoolers, looking ahead to high school, building independence and routines, becomes more and more important to model and teach planning and organization, share your calendars, show them as they get older and approach puberty the importance of learning to pause and managing technology. People often want to know, this is my last little bit and then I'll take your questions, but people often want to know how you know when it's time to get more support, when you should be reaching out to a specialist for some extra support or doing a neuropsych test. I think it's about your own kid and what their normal is, and if you feel that they have deviated from that normal, what's going on. One of the first steps might be thinking about getting a neuropsychological test if you find that they have extreme learning or organizational difficulties. This is a cognitive evaluation that's a series of tests that will measure their intellectual, academic, cognitive strengths and weaknesses to figure out what the underlying problems are. And these are the three indicators that you might want to consider doing a neuropsych. Significant trouble focusing, not just at home, but if you're hearing it from the teachers at school. Significant and negative changes in grades without any clear understanding of what's going on. It's not just that the math class got hard, there's something else going on, right? And then significant difficulty managing the workload. Kids can struggle with pace. We all have a different pace. Sometimes you might have a slower learning process, and if the workload is really challenging or really dense, then it's going to be hard to keep up. And then emotional support, we think about levels of distress. Your kid might want to talk to a professional, a therapist of some sort, if you start to see that they're having some functional impairment, either at school, home, friends, or in their acts of daily living. If you notice that they're not eating, or they're eating too much, they're not sleeping, or they're sleeping too much, their physical activity decreases, or if they have less interest in things they used to enjoy doing, those are all signs that it might be worth reaching out for some emotional support. These are a couple resources. I can also email these to you if there's a good place to put it up, but these are our three favorite books: Executive Functions at Home, 6 Skills Young Learners Need to Succeed by Christina Young. I mentioned the growth mindset idea. Carol Dweck is the woman who coined that term, and she also has TED Talks that has this book as well. Parenting in the Age of Attention Snatchers, a lot of really good technology tricks there. And then understood.com is a fabulous resource, online stuff that has done tons of tools and resources for kids with different learning challenges that you might be interested in checking out as well. So that is what I have for you today. I would love to hear any questions that you guys your email and send you an answer after we talk.